Things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end, if not always in the same way we expect. Luna Lovegood. Hi, hello, and welcome back to the Misadventures of the Mind podcast, hosted by me, your favorite clinical child and adolescent psychologist from Aruba, alias Kalik Nadal. And this is technically episode 21, but maybe for you, if you're a new listener, this might be episode 1 or episode 2. Maybe this is your introduction to the MOTM podcast, where we talk about life, we talk about emotions, we talk about everything in between, growing up, dealing with the fact that we're growing up, and we just like to normalize a lot of things, a lot of struggles, but also a lot of nice things. However, for this episode, unfortunately, we have to talk about a common experience and maybe a shared experience that I feel like personally is not talked about enough. So I'm gonna try my best and do what I can to maybe bring some more light to this topic without it being, too heavy or too confrontational, because that's also not the point. So to my loyal listeners, hi, how are ya? How are you doing? And to my potential new listeners, hi, welcome to our community where we like to dibble-dabble into the unknown. And the unknown, I'm talking about our misadventured mind, our mind that kind of creates these labyrinths of obstacles, I'd say, trying to convince us that a specific thought or a specific feeling is not something that we should be feeling. And on that note, I think I'm gonna jump right into it and talk about the MOTM of this episode. So this week's misadventure of the mind is one that convinces us that grief has to look a certain way. That to be considered grieving, you need to have a certain amount of characteristics so people can actually be convinced that you are in a grieving process. So right off rip, I need to get into it. I need to get into the definitions of grief, the definition of bereavement, which is technically just another word for grief. But like I said, the reason why I feel like this topic has to be talked about is because, one, it's not talked about enough, and also number two, like I've been alluding to for the past couple of weeks, I'm currently in my own grieving process, and to me it has a very different look than somebody else. So I figured, why not talk about it? Why not normalize the fact that everyone has a different way of grieving? Everyone has a different way of processing the grief, but also processing what they're feeling while they're grieving. Because I feel like that is also the part of grief that a lot of people kind of overlook or not talk about enough. And I feel like it is my due diligence as a psychologist, but also the host of this podcast, where we do talk about life and everything in between and everything that is going on in life. And sadly, things like losing someone and going through a process while you're, dealing with this loss is also a part of our life. So with that, we have to hit up the good friend of the pod, Merriam-Webster. So Merriam-Webster defined grief as a deep, poignant distress caused by or as if by bereavement, a cause of such suffering. And I'm pretty sure we've talked about what distress means, but for the sake of being consistent, distress in terms of grief is defined as pain or suffering affecting the body, a bodily part or mind that is troubled. Or distress could be a state of danger or desperate need, a painful situation such as misfortune. So while reading this definition, I thought that's a really good way to describe it. However, because grief is such a complicated and layered feeling and experience, I felt like a logical and pragmatic definition wasn't enough for me. So I did what I usually do. I went on the interwebs and did like it wasn't a little, but a well enough deep dive search into other definitions, other ways of describing grief. So I have to give you psychological definitions as well, which is not really crazy because grief is definitely something that we deal with in like our day-to-day, not as like a therapist, but as people. And grief can be the loss of a loved one, which is the most common form, but there's also grieving the fact that maybe you lost a job, or you lost a friendship, or you lost a part of yourself. You can also grieve the part of yourself that you thought was there and is no longer there. So grief can have many forms, and as such, the definition of grief as well, though all of them describe the same underlying feeling, I feel like the verbiage is a little bit different, and that is the reason why I want to have like also a collective and a collection of different types of definitions describing grief. So one that I saw from the article in NHPCO, which is the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, they describe grief as feelings of deep sadness and sorrow. And there's also a type of spiritual crisis that they described following a loss, because after you've lost someone, it's almost like you don't know how to deal with that loss. You don't know what is true, what isn't true anymore. Like you've lost a sense of connection to the reality. But we'll get into that a little bit more further on in this episode, so bear with me. Let's get through these definitions first. So there's another article that I saw from APA, American Psychological Association, and they described grief as the anguish experienced after significant loss, usually the death of a beloved one. And like I said, they use usually because loss can be in any context of your life, not just after losing someone that you care about. But for the sake of this episode, we will be talking about experiencing grief as a byproduct of losing someone that you've once loved. They continue with explaining that grief often includes physiological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, apprehension about the future. As I said, when you lose someone, it's hard. It's not just hard because they're no longer there, but it makes it even harder when that person is someone who you've spent most of your life with, where their sheer presence has become a part of your daily routine. So having them not be there anymore is definitely a reason for experiencing some of these things. But I shall continue because there is another definition that I really liked, and I found it on the positivepsychology.com website. And I really like this website because it literally talks about everything. So at any point, you're interested in a specific psychological topic, you can definitely check out this website. And they also share like exercises that you can do, and you can download like different booklets and etc. But according to positivepsychology.com, grief is characterized by a contradiction. Now bear with me because this is where it gets interesting, because they describe grief. On the one hand, it is a complex and painful maelstrom of thoughts and emotions triggered by the loss of someone precious. But on the other hand, it is a natural and positive healing process that plays an essential role in helping us work through and let go of the often unavoidable trauma of loss. That was a mouthful, so I do want to break it down and I do want to move forward with this definition because I feel like it encompasses the negative but also the positive of grief and the process of grieving. So I'm gonna say it once again. Because you have grief on the one hand, much like what Merriam-Webster and the other website said, it's a complex and painful experience filled with thoughts and emotions because you've lost a person. However, on the other hand, you have the positive and the healing factor of it. It is a natural occurrence. It is something that happens in life regardless of who you are, regardless of what you've done, regardless of even the relationship that you've had with a person. When you lose a person, when the person is no longer there, it causes a shift. It causes a rift almost in your sense of being, in your sense of belonging, in your sense of accepting and going through the motions of reality. So it is an essential role in helping you work through everything and letting it go. Now you're probably wondering, okay, let it go. It's easier said than done. You know, everyone has their own way of grieving and how that looks. And I'm definitely going to get into that because I do feel like I said, grief as a whole, very important topic, but also understanding what it looks like even more so. And then, of course, coping with that, is also very, very important. But before I get into that, I do want to share a little bit more on the psychological aspect of grief and how it kind of looks like and how we frame it in a very, I would say, easy to digest model, especially when people come in to talk about grief. And I'm sure you've heard of it before, the 5 stages of grief. And there was this article that I saw that actually talked about 7 stages of grief. So, you have the typical 5 stages, which starts off with denial, and then it goes on to anger, and then there's bargaining. In the stage of bargaining is where you kind of ask yourself a ton of questions like, what if I did this? But if I had only known, if there was more time, maybe I should have, maybe I could have, would it have? And, these are all natural questions. These are all a part of the process. So there's no right or wrong to it. It is what it is. The 4th stage is depression, where, it's not just sadness, but it's the most extreme and most intense version of sadness. And this is taking it in a very simple way because depression is not just you being sad. Depression can also have different ways of looking and different ways of showing up in your life, much like grief does. And then you have the 5th stage, acceptance. What you usually learn when you're talking about the 5 stages of grief is you can almost see it as like a curve. It's like a learning curve, You start off way at the bottom. There's pain, there's anguish, and then you kind of start going up where you're feeling these things. So you start off at the bare minimum, which is denial. You absolutely cannot believe it, so there's no point in thinking about anything else because it's not true. But then when you figure out that it is true, you kind of go up to feeling the pain and the loss and the anger stage, and then you keep going up to the bargaining stage where it's like, oh, what if, maybe I should have done this. All of these questions come up, and then this is kind of like the peak of it, and then it goes back down to depression, where you're again feeling sad, feeling helpless, hopeless, everything in an extreme way. And then to kind of dwindle off the curve, there's the acceptance stage. However, in real life, in practicality, it's more like a snowstorm, like a tornado, like a swirl. You go back and forth between stages. Sometimes you're in a depression stage and then all of a sudden you're back to denial, or you're on your way to acceptance. However, something is triggered in your mind again, and then you go back to the pain and the anger. So now you're angry again, and then maybe from the anger you go back to denial, and then from denial you go back to depression, and then from depression you go back to bargaining. So it's not after you pass this stage, you'll never go back to this stage. Much like life, much like everything that happens in life, there's a give and take. There's a ebb and flow. One day you'll be doing okay, the next day you'll be doing not okay. And that is also fine. And that's why I found the 7 stages explanation a little bit more interesting and maybe even more practical. Because the first stage they talk about is shock and denial. This is the state of disbelief and numbed feeling. And then in the second stage, or the second version, let's call it versions. Let's not call it a stage, because that would mean that, you surpass it, and then if you go back you feel bad for going back, and going back is totally fine. You're a person, you're human. Feel everything that you need to feel in the moment that you're feeling it. And I'm talking to you, but I'm also talking to me, because low-key I need my own therapeutic advice. Sometimes you're just kind of like stuck in your own head. You're stuck in your own misadventured mind. But anyway, so the next version of this process is pain and guilt. You may feel that the loss is unbearable and that you're making other people's lives harder because of your feelings and needs. And what they mean here is that basically you start to feel like you're a burden because you're sad. You start to feel like, you're a drag, or no longer the life of the party as you once was. And then you have the other version of this grief process, which is anger and bargaining. And I found it really interesting that they put anger and bargaining together, because it does make sense to have them together. However, they explain here that typically in this version of the process, you may lash out, telling God or a higher power that you'll do anything they ask if they'll only grant you relief from these feelings or this situation. To continue, we have the depression. This may be a period of isolation and loneliness during which you process and reflect on loss. And then you have the upward turn. At this point, the stages of grief like anger and pain have died down, and you're left in a more calm and relaxed state. Now this one, I see what they mean, and I appreciate that they put it like this and they phrase it like this. However, like I said, in reality, in the practicality of it, that's not how it goes, because it isn't something that you can overcome and accomplish. So it's not like because you're feeling less depressed means that you're okay with it or you've now accepted it, because even in accepting it, you can still feel depressed. You can still feel that anger. Then you have reconstruction and working through it. You can begin to put pieces of your life back together and move forward. I feel like you can do that even if you're in another stage, because the thing is, and honestly, it's the sad part about life, it keeps going no matter what. So you can have the worst day of your life, but the time keeps going, life keeps going, people around you keep going, work keeps going. Lastly, there's acceptance and hope. This is a very gradual acceptance on the new way of life and the feeling of possibility for the future. And so, like I said, I really enjoy that they added extra things and really thought it through. Like I said, I don't agree with everything that they've mentioned, but it is a good way of explaining how grief can look and the stages of grief. So we've talked about the definition of grief. We've talked about the different stages of grief. And now I'd like to talk about, because I've already preluded to it, and that is how grief looks like. And that's also a callback to the Misadventure of the Mind, which stated that, maybe we might have a certain perspective or stereotype when it comes to grief and how that looks like. And while looking into what grief looks like, I really had a tough time kind of accepting everything that I read, because I feel like there's no one way to describe or share what grief looks like. I feel like grief is too complicated of an emotion, of an experience, but also we're too complicated of a people to say that this is how it looks like. We can maybe say these are the common ways how grief shows up, but even in coming up with the most common ways that grief is expressed and also experienced, I feel like it's not enough. It doesn't take into account the uniqueness of grief and how that looks like. So grief in people, and in writing my podcast notes, I obviously have like the layout, and in this part of the podcast episode, I have like sad people do this. However, I also have question marks next to it, because it's like, what do sad people do? What is the okay thing? What is the acceptable thing that sad people do or can do or is allowed to do? And that's why this podcast episode is also titled I Smile When I'm Sad, because that is my personal experience. That is my personal coping mechanism, and we'll also get into that in a minute. But I feel like there's so much societal pressure as well to looking a type of way when you're sad, to saying stuff or doing specific stuff when you're in the process of grief. And everyone has their own process. Everyone has their own way of expressing how their denial looks like. Everyone has their own way of how their pain and anger looks like. Everyone has their own bargaining strategy. Everyone has a different way of how their extreme sadness, i.e. depression, looks like. So there's not one typecast that is able to fit every one person. And sure, there are some common things and some common, I guess you'd call it, characteristics of people who are sad and are in a process of grief, but everyone has like their own unique experience, and that is why I'm just going to leave that open. My question to you, my fellow loyal listener, is how do you, or better said, what do you look like when you're sad? How do you experience sadness? How do you experience loss? Have you ever experienced loss? And how did you look like? Do you feel like it was acceptable? Do you feel like how you handled the situation was okay for yourself, not for anyone else? And I guess that's my advice for now for how you should look like when you're grieving. Whatever you look like is how grief should look like. Whatever your process of experiencing this grief, that is your process. That is how you should look. That is your typecast. And everyone will have their own typecast. Like, I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and they asked like, how do I deal with grief, or how did I deal with grief? And I told them, honestly, no idea. Like, I'm still processing everything. Of course, like, it's still fresh, but like I said, like, I just smile when I'm sad. Like, obviously it's not always, like, it's just my way of dealing with it, my way of releasing my emotions, because I do feel like there is a lesson in everything. And even in losing someone, even in, having that sudden change, having that sudden shift and rift in your life is also teaching you a lesson, is also showing you that, we focus so much on irrelevant things, on things that don't even matter, instead of, shifting our perspective and changing our mindset into things that actually do matter. Like, a lot of times you hear people say you don't know what you have until it's gone. And honestly, I feel like that is so true. I feel like we really don't appreciate things when they're in front of us. And that is not just a you thing, that is not just a world thing, but it's also a me thing. Like, I feel like this year has taught me to be even more intentional with everything that I do, even more aware and more choosing myself. That's more of what it is. It's just me choosing myself. And I feel like that is the reason why I smile, because even in my sadness, even in my despair and distress, and even just regular stress, I feel like I'm happy. I'm not happy with how the situation went, but I am happy that I can do better. I can be with people who support me. I can be the support system that maybe somebody else needs, because having a close-knit family is also something that I really, really appreciate. And the fact that we can support each other and we are there for each other and we show up for each other is just, it's a privilege, honestly. It's really just a privilege. And, I say family, but that also includes friends, because honestly, like, if your friends aren't family, like, are they really your friends? What are you doing? Anyways, I'm not here to snatch any edges of it. So going back to that, there's not just one way to feel grief. There's not just one way to experience grief. Everyone has like their own unique experience. Everyone has their own process. And even the length of it, the duration of that grief process is unique to everyone. And for example, my great grandma, I lost her. I had to do quick maths. She was born in 1918 and she was going to be 93, but she died like 10 days before her birthday. So she died in 2011. So that's 13 years ago. Next year is going to be 14 years ago. And if you ask me if I've gotten over that, if my grief process is, complete, full circle, I'd say absolutely not. Because like my great grandma, she was literally one of my best friends. Like, there's no way to explain it. Like, you would just have to have also had someone like that, like not just your parents and also your grandparents, but also the love of a great grandparent. And the fact that I would just like, not just me, but my brother and I would be with her basically every day, the whole day. Like, and that was just a really good time. She taught me about the Bible. She taught me how to sing. She taught me different things. She told me like her whole life story, which I absolutely loved hearing. So, just having those memories. And then I remember at the time, that was the first really, really hard loss that I've experienced. It hurt the most. It was literally like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. And also, the fact that I was super young, like I was at 15, you experience loss and it's tough. It's really, really tough. And now I'm 28 and it doesn't feel the exact same way. Like, it's not as intense, but whenever I do think about her, or, I look at a picture that I have, it's still like, wow, I can't believe that you're gone. It's so weird. Like, yes, she was 92 making 93, and that's already like a crazy feat. But for me, like, I always thought that she would just live until like 100 and like my kids would get to know her and I don't know, other things. Like, she would just see me in like different aspects of my life. But, life be lifing, and people aren't meant to live forever. And yeah, so to go back to my initial point, if someone would ask me, like, is my grieving process like full circle, full, healed and everything, I would say that I am healed. I must say, like, even in the moments where I think about her and I'm sad, I feel like that doesn't mean that I'm broken. That doesn't mean that I'm unhealed. And I feel like that's also like a message that I do want to convey. Just because you're grieving, just because you're feeling sad, doesn't mean that you're broken, doesn't mean you're unhealed. Because, my great grandma passed away 13 years ago. I am healed and I've accepted that she's no longer with me. But it is still sad. It's still, someone who I cared for a lot. So with my recent grandma passing, that is also something that I'm taking day to day, because the way how I grieved my great grandma and the way how I'm grieving my paternal grandma, it's different. Not just because I'm older, but it's also because, now I have a ton more responsibilities. And I feel like the 15-year-old me, I was in school, but at the time it wasn't like a stressful year. Or actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that was the year that I almost got held back a class. So me psychologizing myself, that grief really took a toll on me, because that was literally the year that I almost didn't go over. Interesting how that works. Interesting how self-reflection helps you. So without me dragging on, I also want to touch on the fact that the people in your circle, and this is me talking to anyone out there who has lost someone, including myself, the people in your circle, they love you. So they're checking up on you because they love you. They're asking you every single day, how are you? Are you okay? Do you need something? What do you want? Do you need to do this and this? Are you okay with this and this? Do you want to do this and this? Maybe like getting you distracted and stuff like that. Because they care. And so, yes, you're going through a tough time, but they're also going through a tough time because they're seeing you sad. They're seeing you, upset. They're seeing that you're not yourself, and they just want to be present for you. And we should let them. I should let them, because I remember coming back from St. Martin, and one of my colleagues, bless his heart, he asked me like 3 times, hey, how are you? How are you okay? And, me still being like literally fresh back and fresh into like my grieving process, I got like mad. Like, I didn't yell at him or anything, but I didn't say in a kind of like frustrated way, do you realize that you asked me how I'm doing 3 times already? Like, I already told you I'm fine. And like, just based off of his reaction, I was like, maybe that wasn't the best way to handle that situation. But also, like, it was two-sided, me realizing that my reaction was an overreaction, but also realizing that I am feeling, not okay. I am feeling less myself. And I think that they all realized that. So, they were just kind of like checking up to make sure that I was okay. And thinking back on it, it's very appreciative. And I'm pretty sure I also told him, like, I appreciate that, you're asking how I'm doing. But for me, I just need to do what I'm doing, I just need the one, how are you? And whatever answer I give you, even if it's a lie, just accept it and say, okay, cool, you're cool, I'm cool. And then we move on, like, I don't want to harp on the fact that I'm feeling sad, because I'm feeling sad. I know I'm feeling sad. We don't need to talk about how sad I'm feeling, And this is advice to my supporters of someone who, who might be experiencing loss and or grief. Just be present, just be there for them. I know you mean well. I know your questions are valid. I know that your questions are coming from a good place. If you want to ask a question, you can ask them, what do you need from me right now? And some people might have an answer for you and others might not. And in their silence or their confusion or their unknown, just accept that as well. Just say, okay, you might not need anything right now, so I'll just sit with you. Is it okay if I sit with you? That's it. Or if they do have an answer for you, then you try your best. You do what you can in that moment or time period, whatever, to, be with them in the way that they want you to be with them. And like I said, I know it's coming from a loving place. I know that, you just want to be there for your friend, your family, whoever, your colleague. At the same time, think about what you think they might need. Because you honestly, you know them better than anyone else, and you know subconsciously what they might need. For a fact, the underlying feeling that you have in your gut is telling you, hey, they probably just need me to sit with them. They probably just need a hug of me. They probably just need me to listen to them rant about work and not about how sad they're feeling, So just try your best to think about your friend. Think about your family member. Don't think so much about what you feel like they need. Just ask them what they need. I think that might be the best way to deal with that, actually. Yeah, that's a good advice. I know. I know. But yeah, but that's also a process, everyone has their own unique experience when it comes to that as well. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. Just both of you need time and also grace for yourselves, but also each other. It's not just something that you'll get over overnight. And also it's not something, as a supporter, it's not the right course of action that you'll also get in one go. It's trial and error. And whenever they lash out, just try to remember it's probably not because of you or anything that you said. It's just because of the overwhelming feeling that they have. So it definitely will hurt if they lash out at you, but don't lash out back, because we do have a tendency of saying, oh, but I'm just trying to help you. Yes, that is true. Yes, you do love them. Yes, you want the best for them. However, did they ask you to do that right now? Did they ask to talk about their feelings right now? You do want to help, but let them tell you what they need of you. Let them tell you what kind of help they want of you. So yeah, just think about that, But yeah, now we come to the burning question. Does it get easier? What is the best way to cope? And also potentially, how long does it last? Will it last forever? Will it only last a month? Will it last a year? And honestly, the answer is, I have no idea. Like I said, everyone has their own unique experience. So the duration of it, the intensity of it, whether or not it gets easier, that is not something that I can tell you. That is not something that I have an answer for, because I don't know you. I don't know the gravity of your loss. I don't know who the person was that you've lost. I don't know the feeling that you had when you've lost them. So I can't speak on it. I can only speak for myself. And as I said before, the loss of my great grandma, I have accepted it. So in a way, it does get easier. It gets easier to talk about. It gets easier to think about as well. It doesn't last, or it doesn't have an end date, I think, because I don't believe that you can ever stop, grieving someone that you've lost. You can accept them and you can accept the fact that they're no longer there, but that acceptance part of it is the most tricky. Coincidentally, I also gave one of the students who I speak to an exercise on what they can potentially do to not fast track and fast forward their acceptance, but start learning to accept. Start thinking in a way of, okay, I feel all of these things, and it's okay to feel all of these things, and I'll do what I can in the moment. And if nothing works out, and if I just want to lay, then I'll just lay. And my exercise for them was to write a letter to that person with everything that they're feeling, the good as well as the bad, because that is the duality of life. It's not just filled with negativity, but it's also not just filled with positivity. So on that note, I would say my way of coping with it, like I said, I smile when I'm sad, but also I try to connect with other people. I don't try to bottle it up. I've done a lot of that already, and it's so dysfunctional because no one will understand what you're feeling. That's the bottom line. However, it makes it even worse when they don't even know that you're feeling something. So you having all of these feelings, you having all of these thoughts, and not expressing them or not communicating it to the people who are around you, who are willing to support you, is almost as equally as bad as feeling lonely because nobody understands you. So you could express it, you could communicate it without the expectation of being completely understood, because no one is going to understand you. That's my personal way. I feel like another way of coping is also realizing that you have different ways of coping with it as well. Maybe some days, you want to do something more active, and other days you want to do something that's more passive, that's more laid back, that's more chill. And that's also okay. There's no right or wrong way to cope with loss, to cope with grief, to, I guess, fully understand what is happening. It's tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a roller coaster of emotions, but that doesn't mean that, one, you have to do it alone, and two, doesn't mean that it won't get better. It doesn't mean that you are a tragedy of having someone lost. So I do have the most common ways how people deal with grief and loss. However, it's not anything different than what I said previously, so I'll just name them without really going in depth. But if you do have any questions, or if you do feel like you need more explanation, you can check out the Mental Health America website. It's mhanational.org. And there's a search bar, and you can put in bereavement and grief. But this article has a couple of things that they shared on how to deal with grief. Number one is seek out caring people. Your support system, as we talked about, they're there because they love you, so you can also utilize them. Don't try to isolate yourself. Don't try to deal with your own thing on your own time, because it'll feel even more lonely than it already is. Number two, express your feelings. Like I said, it's already hard not being fully understood because of the uniqueness of your situation, but definitely communicate what you're feeling. And it doesn't have to be the reason why you're feeling the type of way. You can just say, I'm feeling drained. Point blank, period. That's it. You don't have to go into depth. Number three, take care of your health. And that is also something very important that people often forget. Your physical health as well as your psychological health kind of go hand in hand. If there's an imbalance, it can cause more harm than good. So pay attention to all parts. Number four, accept that life is for the living. That's a little harsh. So we're going to reframe that and rephrase it and say, remember the times that you had with your loved one. Cherish those moments. And also cherish the people that are there holding you up as you feel weak, as you want to cry. Cherish those moments where they're there holding your hand, holding your head up high, or just holding you. Number 5, postpone major life changes. Try to hold off on making any major changes such as moving, remarrying, changing jobs, or having another child. You should give yourself time to adjust to your loss. Agreed. And in that, you have to, number 6, be patient. Give yourself grace. Time is healing. Time is the one thing that is actually going to help you in this process. So take your time, step by step. If your job is giving you a hard time, tell them, listen, I'm focusing on me. My intention is very selfish, therefore I will be taking it slowly. Don't expect me to jump into this huge project because I won't do it at my full capacity. So bear with me. Patience. And lastly, seek out help when necessary. If your grief seems like too much to bear, seek professional assistance to help work through your grief. It's a sign of strength, not weakness. And that I agree with. I definitely agree with. And on that note, I think that is a really great way to end this episode. I think we talked about a lot. We talked about, the definitions, how it can look like, the typecast, or actually the atypical types of grief and how it looks like. We also talked about, being the person who is grieving, but also being the person who is supporting your person in your circle who is grieving, and also how to cope with it. And that last part about it's a sign of strength, not weakness, I think that is something that is often forgotten, and we think just because I'm sad means I'm weak, just because I'm vulnerable means that I'll get taken advantage of, just because I am going through a tough time right now means that I'm less worthy of whatever, means that I'm not okay to do whatever, means that I'm broken. No, it just means that you're human, and in your humanity you have all of these emotions, and that's totally fine. That's okay. It's a part of life. And yeah, so with that, I do want to share some positivity with you. I want to share some inspiration. I want to give you some hope. I think that is the key word, the key takeaway. There is hope. There is hope during your grieving process. There is hope no matter what. So I'm going to start off with the affirmation of today to get you through your week, your weekend, or your month, and most definitely through your grieving process. And the affirmation is as followed. I embrace my emotions, my thoughts, and all of the phases of my grieving process. I understand that grief is a necessary passage, though it is difficult, but it is not permanent. What lives forever are the positive moments that I had with my loved ones. And I never ever forget my Bible readers out there, and this week's biblical affirmation can be found in Matthew chapter 5 verse 4, and it is as followed. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. And if you made it this far, thank you. I hope you feel some sort of relief. I hope you feel acceptance. I hope you feel seen. I hope you feel heard. I hope you feel understood, because I'm just here to tell you that I'm here just because. And if you are also there because you love someone, be there fully, be there wholeheartedly, be there intentionally. And for those who are accepting such support, I urge you to also accept it wholeheartedly, accept it intentionally, and accept it fully. And you know what to do if this episode was something that tickled your brain, or in this case, your heart and soul, I ask you to do your due diligence and share it with your friends, your family, share it on all things shareable. You know where to find this podcast on all things streaming: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible. YouTube is only audio, by the way. The video is coming, I promise. But like I said, if it tickled your brain, you know what to do. Share it, post it, talk about it, discuss about it. Share with me what your thoughts on it were, because I am curious. And if you are the person who is grieving, who is in the process of grieving, I'm sorry for your loss. I'm there for you, wherever and however you need me to be. Thanks again, my fellow loyal listeners, and don't forget to smile when you're sad. Okay, thanks, bye!